Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new concept in podcasts, the Wired Differently podcast, with me, your host, Mike Bedford. And on this first podcast episode, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my guest tonight, Dr. Annemarie O'Dwyer. Hello, Dr. O'Dwyer. How are you doing?
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for using my whole title. I do always joke about the fact that I earned it. So whenever I get the opportunity to use it, I do. I never get bored.
Quite literally, the doctor is in the house tonight for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you as my first guest. So thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast and for being the first guest on this inaugural
That's
podcast.
exciting.
I know. I'm really excited to have you. I'm really excited for our conversation. For the benefit of our listeners who won't have had the pleasure of joining us for the last 10 minutes, loads of stuff always goes on in the podcast before you even get on air. So, yeah, we've been having a bit of a chat before we come on and just getting ourselves a little bit into the zone and getting ourselves realized. I think that's a really important point as well. Anne-Marie, is it all right if we go down Anne-Marie now? We're not going to keep calling you doctor all the way through. We're really kind of talking about switching there. My brain was kind of going all over the place with that one, but we were talking about the importance of that, wasn't we? From a really kind of like practical, pragmatic perspective, the importance of kind of like switching and getting yourself transitioning from one task to the other. You know, you'll have been doing loads of other stuff today, I'm sure, before you come on this podcast, and likewise myself as well. And then to actually just flip a switch and go from one task to the other can be quite challenging, can't it, as well? So we did spend a bit of time just giving ourselves that success enablers just to make sure that we could actually flick that switch and get ourselves in the right zone.
Yeah, absolutely. Just that little moment of like transition just allows you to also have a little moment to decompress. And that, okay,
Yeah.
let me get familiar with my surroundings, which is really important for me. Like I have to get myself grounded. And then once I get into that kind of transition, then I'm good to go. But it's always good to have that moment. Yeah,
Yeah, we spent a little bit of time, didn't we, just getting in the zone before we came on air to do this podcast as well, which was time well spent for me as well as you. I can assure you of that. So it's always time well spent. But yeah, the name of the podcast might give some clues away to what we're going to be talking about for our listeners as well. The Wired Differently podcast. It's not just called the Wired Differently podcast because I thought, oh, that sounds like a snazzy name. It actually has some meaning behind it as well. And the point and purpose of this podcast is to bring along fantastic leaders, neurodivergent leaders who are naturally wired differently onto the podcast to talk about themselves, talk about their background, talk about their journeys, talk about the things that have enabled their success throughout their careers, but also some of the real challenges as well, and look for, well, what are the practical things out of that you've learned from your experience of being a neurodivergent leader throughout your career, and what can you share with us, with others, with the listeners to help us really understand them, take some practical takeaways from that, whilst clearly enjoying listening to your story and your background. And we said, didn't we, Anne-Marie, only ever share what you're comfortable sharing. You know, that's a kind of a modus operandi of mine anyway. But if you think there's something that, you know, that's going to be valuable to the listeners while we're talking this evening, because it is evening, it's like, for the benefit again, I appreciate that listeners are going to be listening to this at all kinds of times and time zones and all that, but it's about 6 o'clock UK time on a Tuesday evening now when we're recording this, and obviously when it goes out there, people will be tuning in at all kinds of times as well. So yeah, welcome to the show, Anne-Marie, and we're really looking forward to getting into this with you.
Yeah, thank you. Me too. And thanks for inviting me. And I'm really quite chuffed that I'm the first. Like,
You are the first. You are the first, and a very valuable first as well. You are 001, and you're going to be a valuable 001 as well, I can show. I really think that you'll add lots of value to our listeners and to this series and this conversation going forwards as well. So thank you again for joining us. But obviously, I know you, Anne-Marie. I think I've known you for a little while now through LinkedIn, and we've chatted, we've connected, we speak on WhatsApp, and we exchange messages. I'm a big fan of you and your work and what you do. But obviously, our listeners don't know who you are. So for the benefit of our listeners out there who are tuning in for the first time and who have never had the pleasure of meeting you or understanding about who you are or what you do, could you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do, Anne-Marie?
yeah. Thanks, Mike. So yes, I would describe myself as a neurodiversity advocate, trainer, and, raise awareness around neurodivergence in the workforce, but in particularly in professions such as teaching in the medical profession. I have a background in further education. I used to be a sociology teacher. And while I was teaching, I completed my masters, and I was looking at how the workforce supports neurodivergent teachers.
Mm.
And I was really interested in that because there's lots of focus on learners in terms of differentiation and everything else, and making sure that that you set up your lessons and everything you did from a kind of inclusive viewpoint. But then it's almost like it was almost like implying that you grow out of it, because there wasn't anything in place for for a neurodivergent workforce. So I once I finished my PhD, I didn't want it to sit dusty on a shelf somewhere. And I thought I want to do something practical with it. So I set up Neurodivergent Insider, and that's around working with the education sector, so in schools and colleges, and raising and approaching it, which we'll talk about a little bit later, from a kind of using the universal design framework
Mm.
to create an environment and a culture and structural changes that basically creates an environment that's inclusive for all.
Mm.
That's kind of the key thing that I do. I'm also a coach as well, so that's important. And I mentor and coach neurodivergent teachers. And I think that was quite important for
Mm.
me because I had the contextual background of working in
Mm.
education, that I kind of marry those skills from being in education as a neurodivergent educator myself.
Mm.
So yeah, so that's kind of like me in a nutshell. That's what I do. I do that work part time, and I have another part time role. But that's my kind of a real drive. That's what I try and do, raise that awareness day in, day out.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's really interesting. Thank you. Would you say your mission is to change the education sector then to make it more neuro inclusive?
Yeah, yeah. I think, that is my goal. That's, I want an environment in once that one that it recognizes that, teachers can be dyslexic, they can be dyspraxic, they can have
Mm.
ADHDers, they can have Tourette's, and so on and so forth. And that, that they're in a working environment that allows them to like really kind of succeed. And also, what an amazing, in terms of in a positive sense, role models for the learners, and I do
Mm.
talk about this a lot, that you'll go into particularly schools and sometimes in colleges, and you'll see all over the walls, and they've got these like representation or divergent role models.
Mm.
They'll have Greta Thunberg, and they'll have and others, and you go, you've already got your role models. They're already in your building. You'll be surrounded by role models. And that's
Real sort of role
real role
models.
models. And really, it's succeeded in education because we do have, in terms of when people, if you describe someone, if someone said, oh, I'm, dyslexic, dyspraxic, I'm dyslexic, dyspraxic, I'm an ADHD, and I'm autistic. So if I was to tell someone that, there would be assumptions made about my education level, and I know this. So, and I
Mm.
think it's really
Mm.
important that we show that we want to move away from people succeeding despite the system. And the system should create an environment which people can, that people can succeed in education.
Yeah.
And I do think the role model thing's really important. And also then, but role modeling the fact that we're appreciating, divergent minds. Um,
Mm.
and that then that becomes embedded rather than just having uh like models seen as something that is separate, and that these individuals have superpowers that
Poster boys and poster girls type stuff.
yeah, so just trying to talk about these are, everyday people who are succeeding in an education system or a workplace that wasn't set up for them. And how brilliant would that be? So that is my mission, really, to kind of change the culture in teaching in education.
And a real noble mission it is too. I wonder, you just got me really curious from just listening to your talk there. Do you see yourself as a role model?
Well, I'd like to be.
Think about that, keeping it real and real people and, succeeding, despite
Yeah,
the
yeah,
systemic challenges and
yeah,
barriers that are kind of
yeah,
put in front of you and
yeah,
and making your way to becoming a doctor in
yeah.
your field, which is
I
like
know.
the highest kind of academic sort
Well,
of.
yeah. Yeah, you're right, because, you say I'm scratching a little bit because I feel a bit awkward about the idea of being a role model after going
Mm,
on about praising how we should have role models, but you're right, you should, practice what you're preaching really and turn the lens back on you to go, "Could you be?" But, no, absolutely, because when I was in primary
mm,
school, I was put in remedial class.
mm,
And I was put in
mm.
remedial class because, in the 80s, particularly, and I'm gonna do a little segue into intersectionality.
Please, let's go back. Let's go all the way back.
Yeah. So coming from a kind of very like working class background, there was no question of, okay, well, there may be something around here in, in a difference in a way of thinking or processing. There was none of
Mm.
that. It was, you're struggling to spell, let's put you in remedial class. That's the language that was used at the time.
I say that's polite, Anne-Marie, in terms of language that was used from language that I heard around.
Yeah.
I don't know
Well,
what generation we're talking about here, Anne-Marie, and I wouldn't like to place that on you. But when I'm thinking about 80s, yeah, and growing up, people certainly didn't call you remedial. Let's put it that
no,
way.
but in education, I remember classes. So I was put in this remedial class. It was actually the teacher was like, "I don't know why you're in here," and I used to try so hard. I remember when they're having parents, when your parents' evening, or they meet with your parents, and the teachers would be like, "Anne-Marie goes to the spelling corner and she's really trying." But the problem
Yeah,
is I couldn't identify the first. Like, so someone says, if you want to spell, what are the first couple of letters? I'm like, I don't know, because I can't even see the letters. So that was really difficult. So as a child, I was really trying to find, and no one picked up on it because one, there wasn't really an awareness about or anything about that. So yeah, I think there's something about, I went from being in remedial class to, getting a PhD.
yeah. Which is a huge jump, and there's a lot of story there, I think, in between that as well. I'm going to say remedial. Is that a systemic failure that was at the time? Well, I think we know that now, don't we, with the benefit of hindsight? There was a lot of systemic failures then
Yeah,
in terms of not being able to identify and support
yeah.
and provide people with the actual. And apologies if if you don't want to share this as well, but I was just thinking at that time, and I've said from my perspective it wasn't, but did kids have a lot of diagnoses at that kind of time, and so they could actually get that sort of support?
I don't remember anyone talking about anything to do with
No,
diagnosis at that point. I don't remember anyone having a conversation about, any different neurotypes. There wasn't really that conversation. It was,
no.
the kids that were a bit slower. That would be the language that would be used. The
That's the
kids
word
that
I
are,
think I
yeah,
find creeping
yeah,
back and making me feel slightly uncomfortable is that
yeah,
kind of like, I used to have the nickname of like Mike Lightning as a kind of Mickey take, because the flip side of that, the irony was that is because they found that I was quite slow in
yeah,
picking things up. So they called me Mike Lightning, which
yeah.
when you think back now, I mean, yeah, how horrible, but
I know, I know.
that's kind of like what kind of happened, right? And you
Yeah,
sort of like strive to sort of try to find a way to fit into a system that you were never going to fit into, right?
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I remember one, it still stays with you. I remember a teacher hit me over the head with a book, tapping me on the head
Yeah,
because I wasn't spelling something right. I wasn't recalling something right. And I remember telling my mum, and my mum went in and said, how would you like for me to hit you over the head? And I was mortified. I was mortified with my mum. And then from that moment, that teacher didn't include me in things. Like,
yeah,
because I spoke to my mum, it kind of backfired. Then I was made to feel that I'd done something wrong, and I hadn't done something wrong, So those scars, they stay with you. I mean, I talk about that in my thesis, my dissertation, about those early experiences, because I don't think you can really understand unless you know, like, the life history and all that context that shapes in the individual that you are today. an amazing lesson in endurance. That's what, if I could bottle my
100%.
endurance and sell that, I'd make a lot of money.
We're
Resilience,
resilient
endurance.
beings.
Yeah,
Resilient
yeah.
beings as neurodivergent folks. I wonder if that kind of set a fire within you then, that kind of to change education maybe.
Yeah, I think once I became, I mean, I only entered education at that level, degree level, when I was 25, because when I was 23, I decided to do a BTEC in further education in Lewisham College, because I want to do a big shout out to the lecturers I had at the time, because they were so amazing and encouraging. And the first time in my life that people saw my value in education, that
You were
teachers,
seeing.
yeah, I was seeing they recognised my value, and they were they helped me write my encouraged me to put my application in for UCAS to apply to university, and that would never have entered my head. And at that
Mm,
point, I'd not been diagnosed. I wasn't diagnosed until the first year of my undergraduate. So I'd gone through this whole life, like always been, and this is used to appear in my again in my reports at school, is that Emery really tries. She really tries, and she's got really
mm,
creative mind. And alongside, she'd probably do herself a favour if she didn't talk so much, and all of those things, like the kind of compensating things that you do. But that was a game changer to me, further education, and that's the reason why I went into further education to teach, is because that was felt like a little bit giving back to the system. And because I
yeah.
did want to be a role model, I think was thinking about that then, because of the lecturers that I'd had in my evening, at Lewisham College. They really changed my life.
What was that moment? What was that like enabling moment that happened that changed that enabled you to just go and fulfill your potential?
It was belief, someone believing in me. It was pure belief.
Mm,
It was them me finding my groove and recognizing what worked for me. And what worked for me, because it was a BTEC, was that it was coursework. I'd always struggled with exams, and because it was coursework and there was lots of freedom for me to shape what I did around the way I process information, and obviously as an adult being able to go off and do that, whereas when you're a learner in a classroom you have to do it the same as everyone else, and that is what made the difference. But that shift and that ability being seen and
mm,
recognized and the belief in me is what
mm,
changed everything. And I think that's important to see, that it can't just exist just in us. That's why you need
mm.
society to see us and see that we may look and see the world differently, but it's just as valuable. And yet, I mean, the word's used a lot, thrive, but that's what allowed me to thrive. Belief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that wasn't some sort of big, expensive, fancy change that needed to be made in the workplace
No,
there, was it?
no, it wasn't. It wasn't exactly. It
It was a
wasn't.
mindset shift.
Yeah, it was a real mindset shift, and I was supported through that mind shift, and because they enabled me to reframe how I saw myself through
Mm,
their support. I mean, this is why I love,
yeah.
about coaching as well. The opportunity you get to get people to reframe, like to
Yeah.
encourage them to work, and that's the only way that people can be really empowered, is if they do it themselves. Like, I mean, people talk about this and it feels a little buzzy, like buzzwords, but
Mm.
that's really the thing, is about enabling people, giving people the opportunity to work out.
Self-belief and
Yeah,
self-empowerment.
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, no, that's fascinating. I'm just thinking about what do you think needs to change then in education to enable that?
Yeah, I think in education, we will so there is an education around, with learners, and there's a lot of focus on differentiation. But if we think about how we assess, it's still the same. Our assessments are still the same. And there needs to be a shift around, really, if you're really embracing inclusion, to appreciate that there are other ways in which someone can show their skill or their ability. That doesn't have to be in timed exams. That doesn't, I mean, if I use the example of the A level, when they shift back from modular A level to linear, so that's all the exams done in the second year, that would have an impact on individuals. Because I taught when it was modular, that needed to be able to bank their AS year and bank their A2 year. So they'd an
True.
opportunity to split those exams. Now, we took that away.
Mm.
I think that, really that would have had an impact on, some learners in terms of them having to do all their exams at the end. I think that the way we assess needs to catch up then if we're doing differentiation in the classrooms and we're talking about inclusion. I know
Mm.
that the new Ofsted framework, which is what governs the standards of education. There's a new part of the framework which is all about inclusion, big key part of it. Although it doesn't really stretch enough, doesn't talk about inclusion for staff, but inclusion for learners. And I think so that should reflect then in terms of their summative assessment, because you can have all the formative assessment that's inclusive, and then if the summative, it's all right, it's not following all the way through. So that's what my big thing would be to really let's redesign the assessment as well.
Yeah.
So I would do that, and another teacher would do something else in terms of theory. I like creating the visual. And there are
Mm.
still schools that say, okay, we know that this lesson got an outstanding, so everyone has to teach from the same
Mm.
materials. That still
Mm.
happens. The consequence of that then is that you're not so the teacher themselves, if that's not in terms of the materials, if that's not how they process information or anything like that, they're not actually able to then be their best, and then that has a knock-on effect in terms of the learners. So I think that whole strength-based, around how we organise our division of labour of who does what in the workplace
Yeah.
is
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
important.
It's like cutting jobs and roles according to strengths
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
rather than according to some preconceived idea about what good looks like for everyone.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. When I worked in colleges where you might be teaching in one side of the building and then have to teach your next lesson in the other side of the building. You'd like
Mm.
get pack calls carrying around all your books or everything. It'd be really frustrating. Then you get to the class and the IT doesn't work. Those things
Mm.
about creating stopping those kind of things, those drains on energy,
Mm.
which would benefit everyone. That's the thing about this. It's not just going to be those neurodivergent teachers. It's going to be,
So it sounds like you're slipping into universal
I
design
know
there.
you're going to stop.
No, I think it's a good point. I think it's a good segue in to talk about that as well. But before we do, just kind of anchor that thought, I just wanted to kind of share with you and with like listeners that I was a straight F student out of school because I failed all my exams because that is basically why, because they were exam based. And I
Yeah,
couldn't cope. I couldn't cope with that. The coursework, the studies, I absolutely loved. I excelled in like history and things like that. But
yep,
actually, when it came to sitting exams, I couldn't do rote learning. I couldn't remember
yep,
stuff and then just regurgitate it in a one-on moment. But there's no other options, right? So then my end outcome was always going to be a straight F student.
yeah,
That was it. So I bombed out of school with no qualifications, no prospects whatsoever. Ultimately, F for fail, Mike. That's kind of you. Go and live your life type thing. But like we've talked about, it's that resilience, isn't it? And overcoming those odds and thinking, no, that's not going to be me. I'm not going to do that. And then finding out what you're actually good at, getting a little bit of support and someone's that self belief, which I kind of had at
yeah,
different points in my life as well. And like you, then going on to study like eventually like a master's equivalent in coaching.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
But again, though, it's that didn't just happen by itself. I had to have
yeah,
people out there who believed in me, who support
yeah,
me, and much echoing like yourself, which is why your story resonates so much with me. There was that kind of going into them further adult education and actually getting a different level of support and understanding and recognition. I think that's probably where it changed for me as well, and not having things have to be cut in a certain way. Still getting to the same end outcome, but just doing it in a different way that
yeah,
actually played to what I was good at and played to actually, my strengths that we've talked about.
yeah.
So it really resonated. I just wanted to share that because that really resonated with me as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the same. When I left school, my grades were I mean, they weren't, I can't remember what they were. They weren't very good. I got a B in history, same as you, because I loved history.
Just know the exam. I loved everything about history. I still do. I'm an absolute
Yes.
avid historian. I might not be a historian by profession, but I am. I absolutely love all things about history. I immerse myself in. I get obsessed with it. I think that plays to my like kind of obsessive type
Yeah.
like nature as well. Like so, like we'll go to like York dungeons or whatever, and or we'll go to like the dungeons in Blackpool, and I'll hear the War of the Roses, and then I'll go away and just want to absolutely immerse myself and learn everything about the Wars of the Roses, all the historical like minutiae detail and things like that. Stuff like that are fantastic. Tell me to pass an exam on it, I've got absolutely no chance.
Yeah, exactly. But you think all of that kind of knowledge that like you have, there's another way of being able
There's got to
to,
be. There's got to
yes,
be. You've got to be able to
demonstrate
cut
it.
things in a different way. We don't have to kind of approach. I think what
Yeah,
I'm hearing is, what I've heard quite a bit from different educators and people in education space as well, is that education is just so stuck in the past. It
yeah.
just needs to kind of change and to reform and to modernize. And I think actually, I wonder, I don't know what your thoughts on all this. We'll come back to universal design in a minute, but how technology and modern technology is going to disrupt education.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's already out, it's already out there. And, I mean, really, schools and colleges really need to get, and some of the schools are going to be, if they're local authority schools, that's going to be determined by the local authority. But really, they need to get a handle on having a very clear AI policy, around
So
the
what's
use of that.
teaching our kids? What skills are we teaching our kids that are going to be relevant in 5 years' time through
Yeah.
education system?
Yeah.
Are we still coaching our kids through the curriculum for jobs that aren't going to exist now? Kids that are coming through, are we teaching? Are we kind of molding our kids into professions and careers that potentially might not be around?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I mean, that really, I mean, education is about just what it has been a lot about, just um you know uh getting young people to a point in which they can go out to work. They're not necessarily shaped into, I mean, they get career advice and that, but they don't necessarily shape them for any you know particular
Mm.
professions. I mean, I finished my teaching, gosh, about 10 years ago now, and I love teaching. And even back then there was a lot of students who, I want to go on and I want to be a barrister, and I want to go on and I want to do this and I want to do that, and you would like have to say to them, you do realize how much reading you will have to do. It's like a really like cognitive loading, profession. That's a really heavy thing. And just getting them, and what I found is that, so I left just before they changed the A level back in 2015. Yeah, they changed it, or sociology. And what I noticed is that if you looked at the exam papers, so they got exam booklets, and then what they'd have in the exam booklets is they reduced the space for them, so they'd have a page and a half for them and a bit to write an essay, and then they had underneath, if you want more paper, ask for it. And I was like, well, if because sociology is one of those subjects where you need to be able to write quite complex arguments. And so I think some of the way what they're expected to deliver, lot of information in such a short space of time now, that has an impact. And then the exam, when they do the exams, what they're actually asked to answer is kind of small bits of information. So one of my fears when I was leaving it is, like, do they really understand the subject? Something like sociology, do they really understand it by answering like 5, 10, 15, 10 mark questions and things like that? So I don't know if it, even some of the, when they were doing the subjects, it prepared them for those subjects when they went to university.
Our teachers prepared, do you think, for getting students ready for what's life's beyond education?
Again, there wasn't many options. I mean, again, it's going to be shaped for where I, the places that I taught. But there was a big emphasis on things like going on to university, and there didn't seem to be any other option. Like, I used to speak to my tutees about other options, but it was almost like they have to make up all their life at the age of 16 to 18 about what they're going to do next. And there was a big drive that everyone should go to university. And again, things may have changed, but I don't believe they have. But then there is something about them when they leave university that they're not necessarily, there isn't necessarily the roles out there that they expecting, but also there is something around the technology. This is why I opened with, like, schools and colleges need to get a handle on AI, because if we don't talk to our young people about using AI responsibly, or being able to use it in a way that actually can be an amazing tool, but within reason and responsibly, then they're going to go on to use it in a way in which they, use it in terms of their not exams, like coursework and everything like that, or essay writing, in a way that they're taking away their ability to really express their knowledge. If they're relying on AI to write it for them, so you can use AI to help them in terms of grammar and everything else, and that's brilliant. So, like, I think the thing is again, this is where schools and colleges need to get a handle on a policy, but also encourage people to go, the most creative things that you could ever do are in here or in your brain. Don't rely everything on the computer or the AI technology.
It's a tool.
Because
it's a tool, right?
Because you're going to take away your freedom of creativity. And if they, and what's them shapes, really what's, what Mike's shape, what's Annemarie shapes, I use AI a lot to help. So I'll write everything, but I will just use it.
Understanding how to use AI.
Yeah.
So you get as a success enabler, right? As a tool to help you get the best outcome.
Yeah.
As a supportive tool, right? You can use it as a critical friend as well, but you can use it as a supportive tool to
absolutely
get the best outcome. It doesn't mean that you don't have to do the work. You still have to do the work.
Yes.
But it's there to help make sure that you've got the best tools available to help you achieve that best outcome, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Why wouldn't we want to use that? It'd be nonsensical to not want to use that. But it's understanding, and it's making sure that we're teaching our kids, right?
Use it
how to use it, ethically, responsibly, and understand how to use it as well. Because that's the key, isn't it? As well, because undoubtedly AI is going to play a role in our kids' futures, right? That's just you can't argue with that, right? That's just fact. But it's again, it's understanding. I'm thinking about then that our kids, you'll have seen many of our teachers who are wired differently as well. How does that come in and support kids who don't think linear as well, who kind of don't think in a linear way? How do we use tools to support kids who aren't? How do we use adaptive technology in the classroom to support kids that aren't? That wider, broader conversation without the kind of, that's just cheating, Mike, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I always use technology in my classrooms. That's why I was also I was e-learning manager at one of the colleges where I worked, because I actively always used technology, and I used to always, because they would have their phones out anyway, so I'd be like, okay, let's use your phone if you're going to have it out. We'd use the college, Wi-Fi, and I'd used to get, when they used to have some free apps around things like certain newspapers, and I'd get them to use that, because they used to teach.
Pioneer. Annemarie, a pioneer.
And I used to get them to, we used to use all these
digital nomad.
Yeah, they used to do this thing called Socrative quizzes. There's quite loads of different ones now, but it would be great. So they'd do this quiz, but they'd be working in teams, and they had these little spaceships, and every time they got an answer right, the little spaceships used to compete with each other. But the students used to love it, because you'd get them to use it responsibly and for purpose, and it would be, using it creatively, getting them to kind of check their knowledge. And so I always kind of really always did embrace that. And I used to use, I think it's Mind Mapper now, but it used to be something called Inspiration. So to get them to think about how they could do hooks, or visual hooks.
You're ahead of your time. Annemarie, by the sounds of it, because we're definitely moving towards digital classrooms, aren't we?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's thinking about how do we use all the tools at
yeah,
our disposal,
yeah,
but how do we do that then to segue into universal design principles? What is that first and foremost? Why is that important when we
yeah,
think about universal design principles, and why should we be thinking about that in everything that we do?
yeah. So I don't, I think I've already explained my background in the fact I don't come from, a design background or architecture, anything like that. Looking at, some of the things that around how we can make the workplace more inclusive and equitable. And I start reading more about universal design in the seven universal design principles. And I think University of Birkbeck and Genius Within have created a neurodiversity, universal design around um, neurodiversity in the workplace, talking about the workplace as a whole. And they've adapted it, and that's been quite useful. But it's really about, with universal design, create an environment that most, if not all people could walk in and be able to work and be able to create and be able to succeed, not just get by. And that's for me what, universal design. And there's definitely, things around using, like one of the principles around low physical effort. So for teachers using AI and using AI in terms of prepping lessons. So they would, have the knowledge and they go, right, okay, I want 10 questions on this, and then they can shape it a little bit further. There was a piece of research carried out by, I think it was the Nuffield Foundation, in which it was published, I think, only last year. And it was where they did a sample of science teachers that used ChatGPT to create their lessons. And then they had like an equivalent or sample of science teachers who didn't. And what they found is that them using ChatGPT cut their lesson prep by 30%, which is huge. But
Yeah.
but they had an external adjudicator that looked at both and said you could still see. So the teacher's style and essence wasn't lost in the sample who used ChatGPT, because they used it responsibly and correctly. They weren't getting it, so they were putting their knowledge in there. So it just shows you that actually, if we've already got, Nuffield Foundation, which I think was funded by the Department of Education, so there's research already out there that schools and
Mm,
colleges could refer to and go, well, actually, it's been used, AI's been used, it can make a difference. It could, reduce the time for preparing lessons, which might then
yeah.
just give the teachers time to
More time to be able to teach in a way and find more
yeah,
space
yeah,
to go right back to what we were talking
yeah,
about, to give someone that self-belief
yeah,
in that
absolutely.
moment,
Yeah,
because you're not clouded out by all the time that you've got for
yeah,
preparation and
yeah,
all the rest of
yeah,
it. Getting that time
absolutely.
back gives you the thinking time then as a teacher to
Yeah,
think about, what do my students need?
yeah.
What does
Because
this individual need?
Because what has happened over the years in terms of education is that our contact time has grown. So
Mm,
teachers are ending up by teaching more groups.
mm,
Then that has an impact then on marking. So more groups and more marking. So anything you can do to reduce that, to enable them to get on with the joy of teaching and learning. And it is a joy when you get to do it, when you have the time to do it, cut it, just something like that. That's just like a really good example. Also, in terms of thinking about equitable use around terms and conditions of employment. So again, there was another piece of research. I love my research. So I just want
you
to
are
make
an
sure.
academic after all.
So it was a piece of research in 2024 by the Working Lives of Teachers and Leaders, and they were looking at how teaching is one of those professions where they go, well, we can't do flexible working. We can't allow people to come off site, before 3:30, but you can, because they found in their research and the working lives of teachers and learners that actually just having some kind of ad hoc days when you've not got contact time, or flexible working where there wasn't something that required teachers to be there mandatory from 8 till 5, even if you're not taught teaching, there would be in some places an expectation that you remain on the premises. Well, remaining on the premises may not be the best environment for you to be able to
Mm.
work. I used to find being in my own environment, my own surrounding, going home,
Because
work.
there's a lot of wired differently teachers out there, right? As well.
God, yeah, definitely. I would say a large percentage of the profession is probably likely a divergent thinker. We don't have the stats to support that, but it's like, everything gets massively underreported, and even the Department for Education's
Why
work.
is that? Just curiosity. Just the kind of it's leaping off my tongue. Why is such a thing underreported?
Well, I think partly because we're not creating safe enough environments for people to want to.
Mm, that's a
Uh,
systemic thing, isn't it?
yeah, but also this is the beauty about universal design, is that if you create an
Tell.
environment in which people can actually go in and work and succeed, then it doesn't negate specific reasonable adjustments, and it doesn't negate the need for people to declare if they wish to, but you certainly could reduce that. By creating an inclusive environment. I'd say in education, I think one of the big things, it just comes back to the Department for Education found their workforce data from 2014, not 2014, sorry, 2024, November
Mm,
2024.
mm,
There was something like, of the schools that reported data on disability, because that was, using the protected characteristics. 59% of the teachers reported they didn't report on their
mm,
disability status.
mm,
And so there's something about the collection of data. So if you look at that data, then it was indicating, based on that only 3% of teachers are likely to be disabled, it might identify as neurodivergent, disabled, right? But if we look at the number of teachers, which is over 600 odd thousand, it's
mm.
likely to be that,
Statistically speaking,
statistically speaking, it's likely to be more aligned with the general population figure, which is way underestimated, which is, that
mm,
whole figure that's thrown out between 15 and 20%. So we do have to be careful about stats. But the problem as well with stats is when you have something like 3%, it seems
mm.
like, well,
That kind
is
of
that
feels like you're underplaying.
yeah, but also then schools and colleges can say, well, there's not really an issue here because we've got less than.
Yeah, right. But then thinking about the if you can't see it, you can't be it perspective from a
Yeah,
student, and thinking about what we're going really all the way back about being that I asked you about, do you see yourself as a role model? Thinking about that, if you're a teacher in front of a classroom with lots of diverse kids in front of you, are you a role model? Are you role modeling those behaviors? Are you showing them, are you saying it's safe to be different? It's okay to be different. Look at me.
yeah.
I'm different and I'm here in front of you teaching you. That's okay.
Yeah, and I have to admit, so when I was teaching, I didn't. There was only about a couple of times in my 11 years of teaching that I actually declared to a group of students that I was
Mm,
dyspraxic, and part of the reason is because when I was completing my PGC in fair education, one of the the modules were that you had to do a dissertation, and I at the time looked at I did observations of looking at in the classroom, of seeing the interaction between teachers who were diagnosed with dyslexia and those who weren't, to see what the difference was. And the only difference was is that the teacher who was dyslexic seemed to come up with, would turn up with more props and things like that, and things. Like glossaries to make sure that they didn't, spell anything wrong or anything like that. So they might turn up with more aids, but that was the only difference. And their engagement with, and they might be a little bit more creative in how they delivered. And that, obviously, it was a small sample. But when I was part of that, I was looking at the secondary, the research that was out at the time was really damning. So there was a piece of
mm,
research by Barbara Ruddock from 2003, and she looked at trainee teachers, and their experiences basically shaped my decision not to declare, because they were told
mm.
that they got such a negative response when they did declare,
Wow.
that I just thought, well, maybe I might be best not to say anything. And then when I did,
Drove you underground.
maybe I reject, but when I did, it made no difference. It made no
Mm,
difference. I
mm.
remember declaring I was dyslexic, and I remember asking, no one spoke to me about the Access to Work scheme, which would have been around then. No
Nothing
one
ch
spoke to me about, yeah, nothing changed. No one spoke to
Yeah.
me about reasonable adjustments. No one spoke to me. Well, it would have been actually, sorry, it would have been the Disability Discrimination Act then when I started. It was before the
Yeah.
Equality Act. And actually, I can't
Yeah.
remember how long access to work has been. But anyway, they would have been able to, but there was there was nothing put in place, no conversations. And then when I did ask to be in classrooms where there was technology, I was told, well, can you go and speak to the other teachers that are in that classroom and see if they'll swap with you? And I'm like, you want me to go and declare to other teachers as well?
Right.
So
Yeah.
in I don't yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the thing as well. It's having that there's so much opportunity for systematic or for systemic failure in
Yeah.
organizations because we don't have joined up policy and practice around inclusion, around because you can have that and adopt a universal design. Both of those would be amazing. But yeah, so I think the declaring thing is we're not creating environments in which people feel like they can turn up and be themselves. That's really how I see psychological safety. Can I be me? Can I turn up and be
Mm.
me? If I can't turn up and be me, then I'm probably unlikely going to declare.
Mm.
And also, I know I talk a lot about teaching, but that's because of my work. But that it is a profession where the teacher doesn't, it plays a part in serving everyone else. There's not really a lot about them. And even, kind of sit around CPD will be around what's best for the learners, that sort of, and it will focus around those sort of things rather than what the teachers themselves might need.
Yeah, so we were just talking there, and I think it's a really important point, isn't it, about that kind of those declarations and that safe space, particularly in education there, Mary. I think it's a really important point. What would you say then as a leader in this space who's thinks differently and who is wired differently?
Mm.
What have you noticed in this space and in education space and more broadly in the workplace? But thinking about what have you noticed then there in terms of where there's those systematic challenges and opportunities from yourself, from your career, and from being a neurodivergent leader and
Yeah.
also a coach who works with teachers in this space? What have you noticed is coming out in terms of challenges and opportunities, and what would you share with our listeners?
Yeah. I think so. Um, well, from my own experience, and I've run for a little while a support group for neurodivergent teachers with two others. What is evident is that there are leaders out there. There are membership organisations around education that they want to make a difference and they want to be inclusive, but they don't really know where to start. And what they tend to do is that there is some over reliance on the things that they have in place for learners and then adopting those for the workforce, which misses the whole point that you're dealing with these individuals who, their professional integrity as professionals, as teachers, and that you can't just crib a process that was set up for learners. So I would say, what I've learned from that, what's quite encouraging is that there is an appetite for change, but with all the other demands around, performative measures, around the accountability culture that's very much in education, it doesn't give much headspace for leaders to think about, okay, my workforce, how can I make that inclusive as well? And how can, you know, how can we have a process that's going to be support all teachers? Because that will be the thing of, if we're doing, because there are certain things in education that it's not possible for adjustments to be made and where there is. So for example, if you're doing something like summative assessments, so formal coursework, that all has to be sent off at the same time. But you do have control of when there's formative assessments, so things like mock exams or when they're submitting drafts of their, and then that can be where we build around the timetable. So some teachers, if they need those reasonable adjustments where they have additional time, but they may not have to attend certain meetings or the meetings are recorded, there's ways of finding, and I think it's about education leaders thinking about stepping out and using some examples from wider organisations that are not in in education to think about, yes, you can have flexible working. Yes, we can create environments where, even though there's a lot of contact time and we can't shift the contact time with students, we can't say, oh, we have to cancel that lesson because I'm feeling fatigued. But what we can do is timetable people. For myself, like it would be to timetable me in the same classroom, or at least on the same floor. So it's about leaders being really considered about the calendar for the year, making sure that we don't have things like a lot of the time they're really heavy in the first term. So you'll have open evening, you'll have parents' evening, all of those things one after another, and actually about potentially where they can be spread out. And if you know that there's going to be a kind of pinch point there, what other times in the week? So is there a need to have a all department meeting then? Could you have it another time? Could that just be an email? And that doesn't obviously just relate to education, but it's about, leaders really thinking about, if we create an environment where everyone is seen and everyone's able to do their job and succeed, not just do the job, that is going to pay dividends for everyone. That's going to benefit the learners, which is the key, point, the focus for the education. It's going to benefit the workforce, but it's going to, have a knock-on effect in terms of the wider environment, because what people will see is if you are being neuro-inclusive, it's unlikely that you'll be neuro-inclusive and not inclusive in other ways. So it shows that a real desire to be not only just like a kind of thought leader, but like an empath, and being really supportive in every aspect. So though I think leaders looking at how they can be, in terms of their policies, their structures, the process they have, and where they've got flex, because they've got more flex than they think they've got flex on. And I think it's about really having the appetite to explore that with, HR and everything like that. So everyone being on board. And that only really comes about is if you have every layer. So from the principal or head teacher to teacher learning to HR, that they've all had some form of like neurodiversity awareness training. And then there is a desire where they have clear action points about what they're going to do. That, and in their impact reports, they have really meaningful things that are actually going to make an impact. And then measure that, and then think about how you get feedback, and also include your workforce in contributing to that. But I think this is when we were talking about, the declaration rate with people being low and not declaring, and then that potentially being used, although official statistics, so from Department of Education, those being used as excuses for not doing anything, for being complacent.
Yeah.
Absolutely no excuse for complacency, regardless if you have one or half a person. Do you know what I mean? Like if you know you've got one, if there will definitely be some, neurodiversity is as a biological, fact in terms of human variation and diversity. There's absolutely, you are going to have a workplace of different neurotypes. And so it's your duty to make sure, and I would say that as leaders, it's their duty to make sure that they create an environment which enables everyone to kind of succeed. And there's ways of doing it that don't cost money, not costing lots of money, that are being efficient in time, efficient in resources, but in a supportive way. So that's what I would say is kind of the pinch points. Because what's happening is, just give an example, that the support group that we run for it was about 18 months, about 16, 18 months. And at that group, there was regularly about 15 people that used to engage. And then, pretty much by the end of it, not everyone, but they'd either been thinking about leaving teaching or left teaching. That's a microcosm of the impact.
Calendaring.
Yeah, on in terms of you apply that to the whole teaching workforce. So they definitely need to do.
And we need teachers.
Then we need teachers. That's definitely something that won't be replaced by AI, because that's what I'm talking about. You need in the moment creativity, and you need that. And ultimately, we want a real variation of thinkers and people of how they see the world, because that's what our world is made up of. So I think it's really important for
But we need the right systems,
We do need the
processes,
right
success
systems.
enablers to
Yeah,
support
yeah.
those teachers to be able to support those kids, right?
Yeah, exactly. We want to make sure that there's no systemic failure points. So you make sure that your policy and process and your culture are all aligned, and that's really important. That's kind of the work that I do, advocate to do to make that difference, and also recognizing that there will be neurodivergent leaders themselves will be neurodivergent. So how can they harness that and use that almost like, we were talking about role models, but use that in a positive and think about the freedom that they have to really capitalize on the fact that they think differently and what benefit that would have to everyone and not follow and not be the same. Because there's a real culture of one size fits all in education and they need to kind of break out of that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing everything that you've shared today in this conversation. It's been
Yeah.
fascinating. I'm sure our listeners will enjoy and resonate with a lot that we've talked about in this
Yeah.
conversation as well. So I fully appreciate that. But maybe just close out on just revisiting that question I asked you earlier about, do you see yourself as a role model? I'm not going to let you get away with that one.
I'm not gonna get away with that one. Yes, I would like my legacy to be seen as a role model for change in education and one that benefits all really. And if anyone wants to reach out and talk about how they might go about doing that, if you're a school
Beat me
leader,
to it. How do people get in touch with you if they want to connect?
yeah, then please do reach out to me via LinkedIn or I imagine you'll post my email and
Yeah,
everything.
with your permission, of course, I'll put
Oh yeah, of
your
course.
contact details
Yeah,
in the show notes. I know you can be found on LinkedIn, but anywhere else you might want to be
yeah,
found, along with any kind of interesting stats or anything you want to kind of share in the show notes. We'll pop those in there as well. Might have to
yeah. I love
revisit
a good
those to
stat.
ask you what those are like, but you being the academic, I'm sure you'll want to Harvard reference it.
God, yeah.
And pop it in there.
No, I know.
We'll do that.
I was saying this is one of the things with me. Like I have to. If I have a conversation, the chances of me not bringing a stat in are really unlikely. So like a good stat.
I'm
So
sure there'll be plenty of stats geeks out there who kind of will be absolutely buzzing to hear that, and we'll be following those links, no doubt. So we'll pop all that in there along with your contact details and how people can connect with you and get hold of you and chat with you. And I'm sure people want to do that as well. So thanks again for being our guest and for being our first guest on this inaugural version of the podcast. And all that's to say now is thank you, Anne-Marie. If you want to, anything you want to kind of end out with and close out with.
no, just say thank you to you, Mike, for inviting me, and just a big shout out to everyone who's like doing their best out there, and I definitely welcome if any neurodivergent teachers want to reach out. And I would say believe in your neurodivergent ways of knowing. You already know what you should be doing, and that was what I would end.
Believe in yourself. It's a strong message to end on. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, and yeah, thank you to our listeners for tuning in and for listening to today's podcast. And we'll be sure to come to you again with a second episode in the near future. So thank you for tuning in and for listening. And yeah, keep on
Right?
being you.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Bye for now. You've been listening to the Wired Differently podcast with Mike Bedford. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. And if you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave us a 5-star review as it helps others find us. Thanks for listening.